audience. I'm glad that you could join us on a Saturday morning. Today with me, as we had promised over the past 1 week, I have a very prominent person who not only is someone I really admire, but even Dr. Kalam used to admire him a lot. Meet Professor Sethu Vijaykumar. Thank you for coming here.
Hello, it's a pleasure.
Professor Sethu is from the University of Edinburgh, which is one of the most famous universities in the world, the University of Charles Darwin. Dr. Kalam visited this university in May 2014, visited Professor Sethu's laboratory. Now let me tell you what he does. Have you seen robots? You know, those fancy robots like transformers, or those small ones, which mimic butterflies and many other creatures. Professor Sethu is the leading expert of the world on robotics. His journey begins in Kerala, and from Kerala to Japan to study, and from Japan, and he studied mathematics to begin with, and from Japan to Edinburgh. Today, he is the director of the Center for Robotics at the University of Edinburgh, which is one of the leading centers of robotics in the world. And he's also a professor in the Department of Informatics at the University of Edinburgh. So it's fantastic to have you here, sir. And we all, the audience present here, and many others present on this Kalam Center page, look forward to getting your views. But before I begin, I want to track your journey from Kerala to Edinburgh.
So I must admit that I'm a Keralite, I'm a Malayali, but actually I was born there, but I never spent significant amounts of time in Kerala. So my dad used to work for the government. He was an engineer of the government, Engineers India, and I started my journey. My junior school was done in Tamil Nadu, in Neyveli, and then I moved to Calcutta for my middle school. And I spent about 10 years of my schooling in Delhi, just around the corner, Divya's Archipur. So I'm very much a Dupsite and a Delhiite as much as a Keralite, I would say.
So what did you study in India? What did you study abroad?
So I did my undergraduate degree in engineering, again in RS Trichy in the south, and then I did a master's and a PhD program at the University of Tokyo, the Tokyo Institute of Technology, and that was mostly in the area of applied maths, computer science, and very much looking at machine learning. So looking at how we can take data, process it in an intelligent fashion, and create added value with that. And indeed, as you all know now, machine learning and data science has boomed in the past 5 to 10 years. So you can potentially use the domain of machine learning and data science in various guises. You can use it for robotics, you can use it for social media, you can use it for ordering your next pizza. So that was where I got to in terms of my postgraduate study. And I did a year of postdoctoral fellowship at the Riken Brain Science Institute with a very famous professor called Professor Shunichi Amari. He's credited for inventing the neural networks as we know it today. Neural networks, yes. The study of computational neural networks in some sense. After Japan, I moved to LA. So I took my first faculty position at the University of Southern California in Los Angeles.
That's the US?
In the US, yes. So that was my first postdoctoral fellowship position and first adjunct faculty position at the USC, University of Southern California in Los Angeles. And it's now been sort of 12, 13 years since I moved to Edinburgh.
Right. So you started a journey from engineering into mathematics into robotics.
That's right.
So where was the turning point from mathematics to robotics?
Well, there was always, computer science and mathematics they were all fairly theoretical concepts and things. So you would write an algorithm, you would code up some stuff. But I always had a fascination for things that were mechanical, for things that moved and changed the state of the world. As a kid, I always used to open up gadgets, often not managing to put it back to the original state. My parents would be annoyed at that. But and I think I always felt that I wanted to get into a field where I could take some of this expertise in this kind of applied computational studies into something that changed the state of the world. So robotics was one of the primary areas which really did that. This is where you could really see firsthand the results of something that you've been working on, and that's why I was interested in robotics.
Great. And when did you build your first robot?
So I must say that's I wouldn't maybe call it a robot, but I started playing with mechanos, things that they are powered, but they're powered in using sort of systems that are linkages rather than lots and tons of motors. So I built my first robot when I was really a kid, I forget, so maybe 12, 13 years old, something like that. But really serious robotics started quite late for me, actually. So I would say when I started doing my PhD rather than my master's, well, maybe doing my master's as well, but so later than you would expect.
Right. So the Center for Robotics in Edinburgh is something which you have been a director for quite a while now.
Yeah.
And in 2014 with Dr. Kalam, I also had the privilege to visit your center and see so many things, including a football team which you have.
That's great.
Would you like to throw some light about the football team? I'll show this photograph as well to people once you've told this.
Sure. So let me start by giving you a slightly bigger context of what we're doing at the center. So just like you have a wonderful center for Abdul Kalam Center here with a mission about various aspects of education and getting some governance through. We have a similar mission with Edinburgh Centre for Robotics in trying to create world-class excellence in robotics in Scotland, in the UK, in Europe, and really become the leading centre for innovation in the area of robotics. So it's been quite an interesting journey. So when I moved to Edinburgh, Edinburgh was always very well known for artificial intelligence, for machine learning, for things like data science. But robotics was very much at its infancy. There used to be big players in Germany, for example, were the leaders in that area. Japan traditionally did very well in hardware, and sort of strongholds in the US like Carnegie Mellon, Stanford, MIT's Leg Labs. So they were big competitors, big sort of centers with significant both number of people, the critical mass to make an impact in robotics. So what I felt was that it was important. UK was, I think I would say it's very similar to India in some sense. So we had very good distributed resources, pockets of excellence all around the UK, but there wasn't that critical mass to really go about that threshold in terms of pushing excellence in robotics. Robotics is actually a notoriously hard area to gain that excellence because it's, first of all, it's multidisciplinary. You need significant initial resources to go above the curve in some sense, because otherwise you'll be always catching up and you'll be kind of trying to reinvent the wheel. So that's what we tried and do. We got the involvement of the government of UK. We tried to impress upon them that robotics is one of the key technologies of the future that is going to transform both the economy that we work in, as well as innovate and disrupt lots of future things that we've not even thought about. So we got the backing of the government in terms of creating large funding, concentrated funding in supporting robotics and artificial intelligence. And we also managed to then create the center, which has got three strands effectively. It's got assets, which is a large world-class equipment, part of which you saw. We are training PhD students in this area so that we have a pipeline to push out talent that's required, and clusters, because we need to do legislation or deal with legislation with government, with local council to push through some of the governance through to make it effective. Otherwise, it doesn't happen. So going back to your visit and Professor and Dr. Abdul Kalam's visit in 2014, in fact, you actually saw the beginnings of those center. So
that was very impressive.
So if you come back now, you will be even more impressed, I would say. So I was really honored to know that he was visiting our university, and he was getting an honorary doctorate, and our Vice Chancellor, Professor Timoshe, he suggested to me that we should definitely show him the advances in robotics, because that is one of our sort of jewel in the crown, so to say. So, I mean, you guys came over to my lab. So there was a couple of projects that he had a look at. He had a look at the prosthetic arm, which is something that we've taken out of our lab, essentially looking at enabling prosthetics for disabled, for the people who are infirm. At that time, we were focusing on upper limb prosthetics. Now we're doing lower limb prosthetics as well.
That was a hand, I remember.
That was the hand, exactly.
I have a photo of that hand. I'll just show the people here. Right? This is the photo of Dr. Kalam, and the person who is barely visible there is Professor Sethu. And Dr. Kalam is wearing that prosthetic arm and holding a ball with it, a golf ball or something.
It's effectively an example of a robot and human being interfaced to each other. So I was driving that prosthetic arm with an EMG sensor, which is sensing the muscle activity on my hand. And Professor Kalam was wearing that hand, and we were trying to pick up a box and then a ball and objects of different shapes. And so he had some very, very sharp, interesting questions there, if you remember. I mean, he asked me about the controls, of course, but about, how do you reduce the number of motors so that you can eventually bring down the cost of these things. So how do you get redundancy and synergies? Exactly, degrees of freedom. How do you get synergies into the system so that you can reduce the degrees of freedom? And actually, those were very, very, very poignant questions because sometimes when we develop technology, we sometimes tend to lose track of the original aims, and we go down the fancy route of following our passion, which is great. I mean, you have to follow your passion, otherwise you don't get breakthroughs. But what is really, I think, important and interesting is to ground yourself back into why did you start that journey? And I think for Dr. Kalam, it was always thinking about how can we take technologies from different parts of society and bring it back to, in a very cost-efficient way, in a way that is accessible to the masses for societies like India. So that was a great example of that.
Absolutely. Now, we're going to take a short break. When we return, I want to discuss with you the application of robotics in the future.
And footballing robots.
Yes. One of the applications is that, the RoboCup. Right?
Of course.
And then I want to discuss with you on how India is poised, right? This new automation robotic revolution. And then how do you, out there, become a robotist if you want.
Right.
Thank you. We'll take a short break for a minute.